Okay, we're going to be finding common percentages. Starting with 500. 500 will represent 100%. We want 10%, so we're going to divide this by 10. And let me give another demonstration of that. When you divide something by 10, the decimal changes from here and goes back 1. So what you get now is a 50. And notice that I line up my ones with the ones, tens with the tens, and there are no hundreds for the 50. So 10% will be 50. Now to get 20%, 20% is actually 10% times 2, or doubled. So if I want to find 20%, I take my 10% and I double it. So 50 plus 50, or 50 times 2, will be 100. And so 100 is 20% of 500. Now, let's do 70. 70 represents 100%. So what will be 10%? 10% will actually move the decimal over one time, and it'll go from 70 to a 7. So 10% would be 7. 20% is twice the 10%. So twice 7 is 7 times 2, or 7 plus 7. It ends up being 14. So 20% of 70 is 14. Now, here we have 9 and we want 10%. Well, 9 begins as here, and your decimal is actually behind the 9. So when we divide by 10, the decimal will move over one time. It will move to this position. You'll end up with a 0.9. So what I actually have to do is I actually put a decimal here and then a decimal here to show that it has moved. Okay. And that is, I should say, that's 10%. Now to find 5%, we take our 10% and we find half of it. So taking half of a 10% answer will give us a 5% answer. So taking half of 9 is a little tough. So I'm going to add a 0 here to make it look like a 90. And we'll take half of 90. Or divide 90 by 2. 90 divided by 2 is 45. And the decimal still remains here. So 5% of 9 is going to be 0.45. Next, we have a 1 here. Well, 1 represents 10%, 100%, should I say. If you want 10%, we have to divide that by 10. Dividing a 1 by 10 actually moves our decimal from here to there. So you'll end up getting a 0.1. So let's put a 0.1 in here. So let's establish where the decimal should go. The decimals will be all along this row right here. And we'll put 0.1 there for our 10%. Now, to find 5%, you have to take half of 10%. So half of a 1, it's a little tough. A 0.1 is a little tough. So we're going to add a 0 here. And this will make it easier to take half. So now we'll take half of a 10. Half of a 10 is 5. Do not put the 5 here. Put the 5 there, because this will represent half of 10, putting the 5 in this space. Now, you have space left over here and room for a decimal. So we're going to add a 0 there. And then we're going to add our decimal there. And this represents 5% of 1. Okay, let's go to 100. 500. First, we want 10%. So we want to divide this by 10. So this will move the decimal from here to here, and we'll get 50. This represents 10%. To get 5%, we take half of 10%. If 10% is 50, half of that will be a 25. Next, 20%. To find 20% of the number, you take the 10% number and you double it, or multiply it by 2. So if the 10% number is 50, and we double it, 50 plus 50, or 50 times 2, we will get 100. So I'll put a 100 here. And so this will represent 100%. Sorry, this will represent 20%, my fault. And finally, if you want to represent 50%, you take your original number and you take half of it. So half of 50 right here is going to be 25. And then half of the 0 is still 0. So 250 would represent 50%.